We support people who are neurodiverse. So this includes dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, a whole load. But I'll tell you what, we always focus on dyslexia and autism and ADHD and dyspraxia, and poor dyscalculia. It's never getting the love. So today we're going to focus on dyscalculia and how, or maybe the question should be, is it even represented in the media? Oh, nice, Chrissy. Great to have you. Well done for showing your lovely face. So it's always nice to bounce off people. What brings you here today?
I'm a psychotherapist and work with neuroscience, but work with the emotional brain. But all of my life have been thick or called thick because I cannot do numbers at all. And the more I learn about dyslexia, the more I worked with dyslexia, the more I realised that I have the same things when it comes to numbers, spreadsheets, all of those things, which I'm sure lots of people say. So out of intrigue, really, and to know a little bit more, so I can support other people as well, but also for my own sanity, I think. And so I can tell me dad, guess what, Dad? I'm not stupid.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because we are a lot of today is going to be looking about how it is portrayed as stupid and dumb and thick in the media. And though that is depressing, it's important to know because it helps us understand where this stigma came from. You know, why do people look down upon us? And are we even being represented? So today, we've talked about autism and dyslexia before in the media, and I think we can all agree it's not portrayed great. Dyslexia, you always see the numbers running around, and with autism, you see the really extreme cases, either people who are like savants, who can like recite everything in the world, or people who just can't communicate. And it's not very accurate, but at least it is being portrayed, at least conversation is being started. With dyscalculia, and I will get into a definition shortly, we don't even know how to really diagnose people effectively yet. Like, there's still a lot of transition. However, just because we're not there with the diagnosis size doesn't mean that it hasn't always existed. So it has been portrayed in the media, even if the media was not aware it was being portrayed at the time. And like I said, today's not an exact science because I still think it's a very new subject. So feel free to call me out, correct me, say things if you disagree. I think it's there's no right answer at the moment. And I can see we've got Tim in, which is always great. So as I mentioned, we are exceptional individuals. And what exactly do we do? Well, I see a couple of new faces today. So essentially, we support neurodiverse individuals getting high-end employment, because why should we get stuck with a bad job just because people don't understand us? We help with training, consultancy, workshops, careers coaching, essentially an A to Z of everything related to thinking differently, but seeing different as a positive. And a lovely team here. We are 80% neurodiverse. So myself included, I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, and I have dyscalculia. But you will find that not many people get diagnosed with dyscalculia because it's what we might call like a secondary neurodivergence. With most neurodiversity, it's like, it's a co-occurring. So you'll get, say, diagnosed with dyslexia or dyspraxia, but it's unlikely that you just get a diagnosis of dyscalculia. That's not to say it's impossible, but it's just not that likely. So it's why that I would say maybe not many people here are diagnosed, if any, but just because you don't have a diagnosis doesn't mean that you wouldn't still benefit from the support. And also you aren't still potentially damaged by the way it's portrayed in the media. And just, you know, my credentials, as well as being a neurodiversity specialist, I also have a degree in television production. I know it's weird what you pick up along the way, but hopefully well suited for today. Now, with that, let's look at dyscalculia. But can we really look at it without knowing what it is? I'm guessing most of you are here because you have a rough idea, but still, let's look at a basic definition. So dyscalculia is a math learning disorder that makes mathematical reasoning and computation difficult, in spite of adequate education, average or greater intelligence, and proper motivation. That's a lot of words, but let's break it down. Dyscalculia is a math learning disorder. meaning that it's not the maths learning disorder. If you're bad at maths, if you struggle with maths, it could be 101 things. It doesn't necessarily have to be dyscalculia. Dyscalculia is just one of the potential reasons why you might be struggling with maths. The next thing is, it's about reasoning and computation difficulties. So maybe you see an answer like 1 + 1 = 2, but you just can't work out why the answer is 2. It should make sense. It's basic enough, but you're just not able to kind of like compute the reasoning behind it. But the most important thing, I think, for dyscalculia is in spite of adequate education, average or greater intelligence. So you are not dumb if you're dyscalculic. I'll repeat, you are not dumb if you're dyscalculic. You can be very intelligent. You could even be Einstein, who was actually potentially dyscalculic. We'll talk about that later. But it just means that despite having average or above average intelligence in other areas, it just doesn't kind of add up, minus a ton, or equate to those who have dyscalculia. And it's also those with proper motivation. So let's just say you're like, I can't be bothered, I'm too cool for school. Well, you're probably not dyscalculic. But if you're someone who tries really hard and still struggles, or in theory, you know, very challenging. Kim says confusion with symbols and sequencing and are also cited. Absolutely. Another classic example of people with dyscalculia is when you close your eyes and you try to imagine a number line and do maths in your head, you might struggle to do that. Or to know the difference for like, oh, that's about like 2 meters away. You might really struggle with different kind of signs, measurements. Like if I'm saying, how long is your thumb? 9 centimeters? Like, I don't know, classic example. But now, what is the definition of pop culture? So pop culture is essentially anything in modern popular culture that's transmitted via mass media. So think of things on TV, movies, cartoons, newspapers, radios, anything which is sent to every single one on the planet, basically. And it's important to know because a lot of the time when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're really advocating for positive representation. We really want people to see neurodiverse as a good thing. But we have to ask the question, why is it even seen as a bad thing in the first place? The media, TV makes dyslexics seem blonde and dumb and thick. It makes autistic people seem like they're incapable of basic communication. It shows people with dyspraxia as falling off their bike every 2 seconds. The media likes to portray things in an extravagated way in order for comic relief or to just more interesting to watch, which is, all fun and games. But if that one message is shown time and time again, it eventually kind of seeps into the public subconscious. And guess what? That's in what we believe. So blondes are more fun, but also dumb. People who see squirrels all the time are ADHD. All these kind of tropes which are embedded into our brains, we don't really think about, but they are very much there. So in order for us to change public opinion about how neurodiversity is seen, we do have to take a look at how it is currently seen, and hence why we are doing today. So fingers crossed that made sense. So we're going to start off with films, and these are just a couple of films. Now, I must do a little disclaimer here. On some of the other pop culture sessions we've done, when I was saying, okay, this film is talking about dyslexia, it was very obvious because they actually mentioned the word dyslexia. But because we mentioned about dyscalculia not being that well known, most places, if any, are ever going to mention it by name. So we are always going to have to ask the question today, are we talking about dyscalculia? Are we talking about a maths difficulty other than dyscalculia? Or are we talking about people who just aren't bothered and aren't interested in learning? Remember, they are all different things, but it's hard to say which one is which when we're actually looking at it. So my first question to all of you, if you are able to answer, is can you name any film characters that struggle with maths? So anyone in the media, in films, pop culture, where you think, oh yeah, they hate maths or they struggle at maths. It's not the easiest question, by the way. I think it's easier to think of ones who are really good at it rather than ones who struggle. But think of like your favorite TV shows. Is there a particular character which is always portrayed as struggling? Top of my head, Penny from The Big Bang Theory. She's always portrayed as like not knowing simple maths, but is also very smart. Oh, Bart Simpson. Yeah, Bart Simpson is a great example. He was briefly diagnosed with ADHD in an episode, and then they forgot about it. But he's a great example of someone who is actually really intelligent, but does seem to struggle with maths. But I would argue that maybe it's more on the attention side. April says, I'm pretty sure I saw a clip of 21 Jump Street where Channing Tatum's character appears to struggle with a complicated sum. Yeah, I haven't actually seen that movie, but good call. Now I'm going to move on just because I appreciate it's a tough question to answer, but I do have a couple of examples already up my sleeves. So we'll go with that. Now, the first film, and to be honest with you, the only film I could see where they kind of mentioned dyscalculia by name, kinda, is the 2008 film Amateur, which is from Netflix. And I think this is a really good film, but essentially this is a film about a 14-year-old who is amazing at sports, but really, really struggles with maths. But the way they portray it, I think, is actually a very progressive way. So though it's one of the first cases to portray dyscalculia, just like Rayman was one of the first instances of portraying autism, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to portray it, but it does mean that it's a starting point. So he's trying to do some maths and he is not able to visualize numbers. He's not able to do basic sums. So the way he gets around it is by having these little wooden blocks and he uses them to like count up numbers. So it's a really good way that he might struggle in a conventional way of doing mathematics, but he finds an alternative way of overcoming it. Now, the whole story is about he needs to pass maths in order to fulfill his dream of sports. But ultimately, a couple of spoilers ahead, they end up cheating the system so he can get in. And he feels kind of cheated by them for doing that because he's like, I am smart. I don't need people to cheat for me. I just needed to do it my own way, which I think is a really good way. So if I recommend any film today which shows dyscalculia in a relatively positive way, it would be Amateur. I know, yeah. Now, my next question to you, if you're able to participate, is how did you find maths at school? Was it something that you found really difficult or something that came second nature?
If I can speak, it's you mentioned just previously about needing to know why, and I can remember in maths being told what to do, but kind of needing to know why. I'm a very literate person, and I'm good with words, but in that I was always, but why does that make that, and why does that, and it just nothing could make sense, and I cheated my way through my GCSE maths. The boy next to me, who was a lovely friend still, he passed me his paper. And the only reason I got through my maths GCSE, which I didn't pass a C and above, I didn't pass a C and above until I was age 27 after 7 times of trying. And at that time, it was only because my lecturer sat next to me and said, no, it's C, don't press A into C. And I cheated my way through my maths GCSE throughout my life. And that really stays with me. And it was a difficult and humiliating process in my experience, really.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. And I mean, that resonates so like closely with my own experiences and also that character on Amateur. It's tough because you're right. It sounds like you knew it, but it's the reasoning behind it. Like, I know like 6 sixes are 36, but for me to really break it down, or I might be able to tell you what the first few characters of pi is, but I would really struggle to explain the concept. And it's a sad truth. To be honest with you, I'm pretty certain I cheated as well. I remember on my rubber, I would kind of engrave into the rubber like formulas. Hopefully they don't take my GCSE away from me now. That would suck, but oh well. But it is sadly common. The next one is a film called Peggy Sue. So it seems a bit like there, she's struggling with maths because she's not able to see the reasoning behind why it's important. And this is another thing when it comes to maths. With a lot of people who are neurodiverse, we tend to be quite literal. We tend to need an explanation to why things are important for us to kind of adopt it. And if has anyone ever told you, I want you to just go do that? And you're like, why? Just do it. And you really struggle to do it because for you, you can't really understand why it's important, why it's relevant. And sometimes you might rebel. I know for me, I am very difficult to manage. And I think that's because unless you break it down to me why you're asking me to do something, I'm not really able to get fully behind it. And Peggy Sue does exact that. Because algebra is a very abstract thing and it's very difficult to apply to everyday tasks, her brain just kind of loses attention and it's not able to focus. April has says, when I was in secondary school, I was in the lower sets. I had a private maths tutor at tutor homes and at my family home. I can especially remember getting private tuition for GCSEs, intermediate maths, because I was in the foundation sets and my dad didn't want me to get anything lower than a C. Yeah, I completely flunked my GCSEs, but then I had to redo my maths at college in order to do my subjects. But I actually got a C at college because rather than doing one big test, we did them in different little segments. So mini tests throughout the year. And it worked better for me because my brain didn't have to retain all my information at once. It's really bad, but I'd be able to do one test and then I'd completely forget every single thing I learned. And then I'd focus on the next test and the next test. So ultimately, by the end of it, yes, I got a C, but I remember nothing. So on here, have you ever needed to use algebra in real life? And you might even ask you, what is algebra? When you do A plus B equals X. And someone that says yes, and I'm not saying it's useless, but I do think for a lot of us, it isn't something which seemingly we use on a day-to-day basis. And it's why it can be quite difficult. It knows for me, I really struggle with metric measurements because I grew up learning imperial and all of the scales in my house were stones or inches. So for me, I never saw the point in school because I was like, I don't use this. But I think it's interesting how the brain works. Remember, this isn't about you saying, I can't be bothered to learn this. It's about you not truly believing that it will be useful so your brain doesn't kind of retain that information. Moving on to actors, are there any celebrities who have come out and said, you know what, I do have dyscalculia? Well, short answer, no, but there are some people who are strongly suspected of having dyscalculia or have resonated with having math difficulties. We've got Robbie Williams, who has mentioned difficulties with maths on numerous occasions. We've got the lovely Cher. We've got Henry Winkler, which I believe is the Fonz. We've got Bill Gates from Microsoft, Benjamin Franklin. Obviously, most people would know him. Yeah. Now, we got a quick message from Wayu. Again, apologies if I pronounce the name wrong. Yeah, I know why I had to take 2 kinds of maths in IGCSE, and because I didn't think it was important, I kept on failing the subject even though I studied. Yeah, I studied a lot, and it will. So at the moment, Robbie Williams, yeah, who doesn't love him? Cher, Henry, Bill, Benjamin. And I think it is really important to know that these people demonstrate a lot of the characteristics of dyscalculia, but to say outright that they have dyscalculia would probably be wrong. I always tend to go under the thing of self-diagnosis. So if someone says to me, oh, just so you know, I have dyslexia, I don't really mind if you're diagnosed or not, because to get diagnosed the odds are against you. You've essentially got to be white, you've got to be male, and you've got to be from a middle to higher income community. Knowing that, because that's, discrimination 101, it would be unreasonable to say if you aren't diagnosed, you can't get support, because that would limit so many people. And dyscalculia is even worse because we do not know much about it yet. I think in a few years' time, we'll probably find out it's as prevalent as dyslexia. But at the moment, we just do not have the research around it. So until we get more research, we're just going to have to accept that use people who have showed similar challenges. I think a really interesting one here is Bill Gates, because we always think of him as a maths pro, but that didn't mean that he still struggled with concepts and formulas. However, he was able to find creative ways around the problem and be able to use different skill sets in order to, make his empire. So just because you have a condition which means you struggle in a certain area doesn't mean that you can't be successful in that area. And we will kind of look at this a little bit later as well. Now, here's a question which I think is a really interesting one about retrospectively diagnosing people. So should historical people be classed as dyscalculic if they have strong characteristics? Yes, it depends, or no. And the best example of this is Einstein. When you search celebrities who have dyscalculia, Einstein comes up. When you search celebrities who have autism, dyslexia, ADHD, literally every condition under the sun, Einstein comes up. Was Einstein neurodiverse? We do not know. He was too old at the time when we started doing diagnosis, and he wasn't tested. We did cut up his brain, and I think it is in little slides right now, but that only tells us so much. I think it's good to find role models that we can resonate with, but it can be damaging to just retrospectively call everyone, because it can kind of limit. I don't know, I'd be curious to know your thoughts and opinions on this. But why do we think Einstein might have been dyscalculic? Well, he struggled a lot in his early years with learning. He was a very slow learner. Like most of us, we're about a couple of years behind our peers, which is normal, but then we tend to catch up and then absolutely thrive. He struggled with reading and writing. He didn't speak very fluently. He would continuously get equations wrong. But that is part of the reason why he was able to be successful, because he was able to see kind of between the lines of numbers. Does that sound like dyscalculia? Absolutely. But can we say choreographically 100%? No, we cannot. Okay, moving nicely on to television. Tim says, his limited real-time computation definitely implied neurodiverse, but pinpointing it in hindsight is problematic. 100% agree with you on that. I think it's interesting to do it as a exercise to think who may have had it, but you've got to be very careful on who you say. And maybe the same logic can be applied to fictional characters, because obviously a lot of the times they aren't said definitely, but they are hinted at. I think, if you look at LGBT in media in the past, what they would do is they'd hide references within the acting or the different setups, because they didn't feel comfortable at that time to say it outwardly. Now, maybe that's similar-ish to neurodiversity, but I don't think it's as conscious. I don't think people are saying we can't say dyscalculia because we're scared or afraid or, worried about the repercussions. Sorry, I made that word up. But I think maybe there's some similarities in it. Now, I just want to ask you, are there any TV characters? Now, think of cartoons, think of fictional things that you think may potentially have dyscalculia. Maybe I'm thinking Dennis the Menace. We already mentioned Bart Simpson. I'm pretty certain Sailor Moon hates maths. It doesn't mean they definitely are, but can you think of any characters which are always portrayed as the character who is always getting things wrong or always struggling with it? I'm sure I can think of another one as well myself. I would say Fry from Futurama. Yeah, we got Penny from Big Bang Theory. I think definitely. Remember, the characteristics we're looking for is someone who is intelligent in other areas but struggles with maths. If they're just portrayed as a dim, dumb character, probably not the best. We got Claudia Kishi from The Babysitter's Club. Do you know what? I haven't watched that, so I'm going to have to take your word on it, but I'll definitely look it up and maybe add it if I ever repeat this one. I have heard of The Babysitter's Club, though. I used to watch The Sleepover Club when I was younger, but maybe that's something I shouldn't brag about. Now, for any of you born in the 90s, or maybe even this will start the 80s, but I remember it from the 90s, Saved by the Bell. So Jessie, she was, the standard academic one of the group, and she would have a complete meltdown when it would come to her geometry midterms. But the typical point is that neurodiversity is something you are born with and you are die with. However, it can affect you to different severities depending on different life situations. So let's say, you're super stressed, your autism might be more apparent. Or if you're like moving house, your dyslexia might get like worse. So you might struggle to like read things and to speak coherently, even though normally you can. The same logic applies to dyscalculia. It doesn't mean that you have to be bad continuously, but let's say when you're particularly stressed, like a test, your maths could be severely impacted. It's why that maybe, when you're sat at home watching a game show, you can get every question right. But when you're on that game show and you've got to push that buzzer, the words just escape your brain. So it is interesting to know that you are at an extra disadvantage when you're doing exams just because of the type of pressure that you are under. And that's not just a coincidence. It is linked. Okay. So on this one, I just need a nice little traffic light system to rate how anxious do you get before doing any sort of maths. Now, this could be literally giving change to someone, doing your taxes, anything. Are you on a complete meltdown? Are you, yeah, I'm okay with it, I'll do it. Or do you love it? Like, yes, I love a good challenge. So we got here, most people are okay with it. And about 33% of you are having a complete meltdown. It makes sense. And we are not saying that every single day you're having a meltdown, but maybe when there's certain expectations on you, like when you're dealing with money, if you get one digit out of place, you've just lost a lot of money. So it's really important to get the exact details correct. And the more you worry about getting those correct, the more likely that your brain is going to struggle in getting it exactly spot on. And for most creative subjects, there isn't a yes or no answer. But for answers in science or definitely maths, you are more expected to be yes or no, less gray area. All right, now I'm not sure if anyone used to watch this. I used to love this show. Everybody Hates Chris. And he is a smart kid, to be fair. Well, he struggles. He's just like a bit of a loser, but he's also charming at the same time. We all learn differently, and there might be certain people we learn better from and certain people we learn worse from. So maybe it could be that you have the wrong teacher or the way that they're teaching you isn't suited for your type of mind. This easily relates to dyslexia, which I think people are more understand a bit more. So the question I want to ask a lot of you is, who do you learn best from? Like, is there a particular person that you find you are more likely to retain information from? Now, it could be a parent, a teacher, a friend, or maybe you're better at learning from yourself. Now, I guess a teacher would be the best one because that's where we go to learn, but they might not explain it in a way that suits your mind. A teacher might come from it from a very methodical approach, where a parent might talk about it in a very outdated way. In America, they have new maths and old maths because apparently they changed the way they taught it. For me, I actually learn best from myself. And I know that might sound weird, how can you learn from yourself? But I would go out my way and watch YouTube videos, podcasts. It would have to be a very isolated thing. If I learn from someone else, I think my brain is overloaded because I'm thinking, I also have ASD, which means I'm struggling with communicating in a social way. So my brain is already working overtime just to survive in a social environment. And while it's busy doing that, there is no chance I'm going to be able to do all the calculations and extra math in my head. I like to think of it like RAM of a computer. So I don't know if any of you know about computers, but computers have RAM, like memory. And that's essentially about how many calculations it is able to do and hold at one particular time. Now, if you don't have enough RAM, the computer just kind of freezes and shuts down. That's like my brain. If you overload it too much, we are shutting this team down. Okay, moving on to my favorite section, animation. So how has dyscalculia been shown in cartoons? And I think cartoons are great because they're able to show different theories or ideas or conceptual things in a way that real life could never show. If I ask you to show me what dyscalculia looks like, how do you honestly show that? Because it's not something you can touch and feel. But I do think there's a lot of animated series that do a pretty good job, but not all of them, as we'll soon see. Well, who said, I'm good at teaching myself, but with friends, it's always fun. So I'll remember the experience as well as the subject we are studying. I completely agree with you. If you make things fun, they tend to stick in the brain. And that's why on these workshops, I do my best to make them interactive, because we do learn best when we're at ease, when we're having fun, and we're having a good time. So for animation, I'm not expecting any of you would have seen this, but there's this Warner Brothers cartoon called A to Z. And the guy, Ralph, he has a maths problem in class, but he can't seem to solve it. Then he imagines the numbers laughing at him and fights back at them. It's not just the sum which is intimidating, it's also the social situations. So you cannot take, if you were just to say it's someone who is bad at maths, I think that is doing dyscalculia an incredible injustice, because it's about everything. It's about how the brain is processing information. It's about how much it can hold on to at a time. It's about how the rest of the world is also impacting it. So there's a lot of different things. And maybe this kid, maybe he was able to do it when he was sat at the table, but when he had to go up and do it to the classroom, suddenly the numbers just was overwhelming. And that was the last thing he would potentially be able to do. The next one is Avatar, and this is a bit more of a modern reference. So Aang, who can like move water, ice, rock, fire, all that great stuff, he also has nightmares because he didn't study. And you'll see this is a real big theme or trope when it comes into the media. It's about people getting scared for exams and tests. Now, I would love to know from your perspective, is this dyscalculia, or is this just a normal thing that everyone experiences? Because I would say most people get kind of nightmares or fears over tests. But when you watch Avatar, you'll notice that Aang actually never does maths. He uses his skills in all other areas, but he avoids maths. And that's a classic thing for dyscalculia. Again, I'm pretty certain Aang could do it if he really wanted to, but he will do his absolute best to avoid it. And people who struggle or have math difficulties will go out of their way to avoid it. Like, for instance, when you're having like dinner with your friends and it comes to splitting the bill, you always leave someone else to do it. It's a type of thing where you do not want to be put on the spot, because either you're scared of how you would look to others, or you just know that it's not going to be apparent, and then people might start to question your intelligence. Tim says, as I mentioned, maths is computational. So for some, it is singularity a hard subject. Yeah. So a question that I want to put all to you, and again, right or wrong answer, I'm not sure, but should dyscalculia be treated like a disability in media? So is it a disability? Yes, no, yes, but not like that. And I'll talk from a UK perspective here, but we often talk about the UK's Equality Act, and neurodivergence is typically considered a disability. And is it a disability? Well, yes, because a disability is anything that affects you for about 12 months or more to a medium to severe way, which, yeah, so dyscalculia, well, it affects you for life, so tick. And does it affect you in a severe way? Well, I think that depends on your role or what you're doing in life. If your role continuously evolves around numbers and computation, then I would say that's a pretty severe way. But for other people, it's not something they do on a day-to-day basis. And that's why some people who have dyscalculia may not resonate it as a disability. So I think it's important to know the context and people's personal assumption. But I can see a lot of us do not want it to be seen as a disability. And I think because sometimes we can feel quite guilty to contribute something as a disability when we know other people are finding things more difficult. But I think with most things, it's disabling in certain environments, and rather than disabling for everything we do. But it's definitely an interesting question. But should it be treated as a disability in the media? Maybe I'd say yes, but not like that. Just because at the moment, difficulty at maths is portrayed as being dumb and stupid and having low intelligence. It would be nice to see it shown as someone who has amazing skills in other areas, but might struggle in that particular area. And I think at the moment, TV likes to portray a character as the dim character. That character's whole entire personality is being bad at things. Now for Danny Phantom, and I want to say, he was Nickelodeon, right? And I think Danny is a really good example. So Danny Phantom, this is the main hero's worst subject. So he really struggles with maths, especially problematic since his goal is to work for NASA / become an astronaut. So there are examples of people who on a day-to-day basis would be great in that role, but due to one particular subject, they have been let down. A classic example is I'm actually pretty good at science. I love science, and I'm actually soon to be starting a master's in neuroscience, which I'm really happy about. But guess what? I couldn't study it in school or college because I was terrible at maths, which meant as a result, I wasn't able to study science. So there's many people who, just because they have a learning challenge in one particular area, it can impact them for the rest of their life. And April has kindly pointed out, it is Nickelodeon. I thought so, because he looks like the same animation from Fairly OddParents. So a question to all of you is, what was a job you wanted to do when you were younger, but felt you would not be able to do? So think of things like maybe you wanted to be an astronaut, but you felt that that was just not possible for you because you knew you would struggle too much, say, in maths. I really wanted, I wanted to be an artist. And I know this seems daft, but in school you had to do all the writing along it. And I just wasn't able to explain my rationale for doing things. So ultimately I failed art despite not being bad at it. Okay, we've got architecture. I think architecture is a really good one. They expect you to know a lot of the theory side of it. Psychology, teaching, graduate architecture. Tim says many people who failed maths got pushed into programming, turning the tech boom, and then pass their maths. Yeah, I think that's a good point, actually, because the way we learn is different. So there's many people who, as Tim mentioned, would have failed maths, but then eventually went into coding and have done great at it, because now there's a purpose behind it. They're being taught in a different way. They can apply it to real life. Or when we talk about algebra, on a day-to-day, not useful, but when you apply it to certain things like coding, then there's a purpose behind it. So the brain finds it far easier to connect with it. So I'd say if any of you really do struggle with maths or think you may be dyscalculic, don't give up. Don't avoid something just because it's difficult, but try and find an alternative way of doing the same thing if possible. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's having a calculator, an abacus, finding different patterns. But I also think technology is a massive help. I'm sure a lot of you remember when you were at school and you had a calculator and your teacher would say, you're not always going to have a calculator on you. Well, joke's on you. I always have one on me. A composer, that's a really good one as well, actually. That's a really good one. Subjects which at first glance you would see that it shouldn't be a deal breaker, but can actually block you from achieving your goals. Chrissy says, couldn't understand the calculator either. Yeah, no, that's a really, really strong point. Because the calculator, sometimes the numbers can get confusing. I knew someone who we used to teach who had a really particular type of dyscalculia where they could not compute the number 5. I know it seems odd, but so every other letter was fine, but any math or equation that had 5 in, they could not do. They would always write 6 without fail. And they knew it was a problem, yet it would still happen. And I can kind of resonate with that with dyslexia. There's words that I know I always read and spell wrong, yet I still do it each time. So how did he get around it? Well, he ended up putting little colored stickers on it. I think I've got some some here. He used to put like these colored stickers like on the numbers. So 5, for example, was blue. And he would end up doing maths with different colors. So like yellow could be 1, 3 could be pink, along those lines. And I thought that was a really ingenious way of solving that. I'm not going to say that's going to work for everyone, but it worked for him. And I think that's the best way when it comes to supporting people who are neurodivergent. Find ways that work for them. Tim says the symbols on a scenes calculator used shorthand, so it became confusing, even if the logic was understood. Yeah, another great example. You might understand the logic, but the symbols can be confusing. Or it could be vice versa. Oh, on a science calculator, got you. Yeah, those science calculators. I remember we all had to get them for school, but I don't think we ever used the scientific calculations. But also we've got Batman and Barbara, who is, tell me if I'm wrong, Tim, but it's Gordon's wife. Yeah, no, I swear it was. No, it's not. It's daughter. Okay. And she essentially doesn't like maths. So what does she do instead? Well, she suits up and becomes Batgirl. Oh, they're both called Barbara. Thanks. So just because, say, maths isn't your best subject, is there another area you particularly thrive in? And this is one of the best ways to know if you might be dyscalculic or might just struggle overall. Typically, you'll have another area where you particularly thrive in or you find easier. And not surprising, most of us has put art. It's very common for people who are neurodiverse to thrive in art because it doesn't have a right or wrong answer and it allows us to use our creativity. We've got Beavis and Butt-Head. He says numbers are too long. And one thing that dyscalculics can struggle with is like converting numbers and words. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 zeros. And I'll be honest with you, I would not have known this myself. I just cannot connect the two. So if I see that number, I will not be able to read it. The correct answer is in fact billion. So good on you if you got it. And whoever put option 1. Okay, we've got a few. We've got Donald in Dreamland. We've got Fairly Odd Parents. This is a really interesting one. Timmy has to do the thing, 2 plus 2. And the correct answer, as most of you would get it, is 4. But Timmy says it's 5. And he ends up getting Stephen Hawkins to prove that the answer is, in fact, 3. And it shows you that there is always a creative way of achieving a different answer, but the world we live in and the rules that are created for it just maybe aren't suited for that particular mindset. But I think it's quite an interesting question. Oh yeah, popular music. So there's a few musicians who I think do songs about dyscalculia, and I think it's quite interesting. I'm not going to sing it, but Jimmy Buffett, who I'm guessing many of you have not heard of, but he does geometry and trigonometry. These are numbers too big to be named. Numerical precision is a science with a mission, and I think it's going to drive me insane. Another good example is Sam Cooke, who says, don't know much about geometry, don't know much about trigonometry, don't know much about algebra, don't know what a side ruler is for. So there are people who I think clearly show traits of dyscalculia, because Sam Cooke, if you don't know him, he's a great musician and very, very smart and very accomplished in his own right. Oh yes, Tim says the word Google is sometimes mistakenly used as a noun to refer to the number 10100. I think it's a Googleplex, isn't it? Which is the actual number. Deadmau5, you've probably heard of him. He does a lot of club music. He likes to poke fun at the fact that he struggles with maths because he actually named his album, what did he name his album? 4 plus 4 plus 4 is 12, 12 plus 12. So he actually names the album to do with maths, to be fair. He has a song around it. So for him, that was a big deal. Maths. Okay, now we're on to religion. So even one of the most influential books of all time, the Bible, even gets their maths confused. So in Genesis, Jacob descendants have 32 children named. When crossing Egypt, whereas the narrator count is 33. So I just kind of want to know, like, how could they get that wrong? Because let's say the Bible is not wrong, because it can't be if you are Christian. How did they get this wrong? And, you know, there's lots of theories to reasons why, and there's always someone willing to explain it. But dyscalculia and getting things wrong and overlooking things has always been something that humans do. We invented language, we invented maths. It's not something that is pre-programmed into our brain. So it's not surprising that it's something that we may get wrong from time to time. Toys, even toys have dyscalculic tendencies. This one, though, I would say is more about sexism than it is about dyscalculia. And some books. So who are some classic characters which are depicted as struggling with maths? Believe it or not, Bella from Twilight. Not so much in the films, but in the books, she absolutely hates maths. We've also got Sansa from Game of Thrones, or more appropriately, A Song of Ice and Fire. Sansa from Ice and Fire is good at everything a lady ought to be good at, except for the maths necessary to keep track of her household accounts. I would say she has more tendencies to be dyscalculic than Bella does. Bella just hates maths. I think unless we know more information, we couldn't possibly say. But for Sansa, who is pretty much good at everything, this is a really strong indication. Again, I can't say with absolute fact, but a good indication. So I would like to ask you, are these examples of dyscalculia, or are they just examples of bad at maths? And there really isn't a right answer to this. So when people are showing these, are they showing dyscalculia, maybe even unconsciously, or are they just trying to say someone is bad at something? Okay, we've got one for dyscalculia. And I don't know on these, to be honest. I like to think someone like George R.R. Martin, when he was writing Game of Thrones, he's a smart man. I like to think that he was embedding these different conditions and ways of thinking into his writing. But when it comes to things like Twilight, I think they were just trying to show that she's an average girl living in a material world. You know, I don't think they think about it too heavily. So though today's session, you'd like to think that it might have been dyscalculia, I think more often than not, it might just be bad at maths. But unless we ask the author, who is to know? April says, I've seen some characters in girls' comic annuals who I think show dyscalculic characteristics. They are Mary from A Fast Learner in Judy, 1984, and Neela from The New Girls in Bunty, 1998. Oh, nice. Very, very obscure characters. Good work, April. And just to finish off, even in comics, a classic one is Calvin and Hobbes. Maybe we'll come back to that for you to read, but essentially he struggles and his tiger is also not the best at maths, imaginary. Stand-up comedians, we've also got people like Bill Engvall, I think you would say, and he makes jokes about being bad at maths. He's saying, sure, baby, let me take a look at that for you. And he's like, oh, when do they start putting the letters with it? Because numbers doesn't have letters and this isn't something that he understands. So this brings me on to, is it okay to joke about dyscalculia or to joke about difficulties in maths? Essentially, when we look at pop culture, we use neurodivergence or challenges or learning difficulties as the butt of all jokes. Maybe you're okay with that. Or maybe you're like, nah, it crosses the line. Most of you have put it depends. I can probably guess why. You know, I'm all about freedom of speech, but I think as long as it's not detrimental to others involved. So for instance, make a joke about being bad at maths, fine, but then show that the other person has additional strengths. When we portray people as like two-dimensional, like you are the dumb character, it kind of creates this idea that when you're at school and you see a kid who is struggling with maths, you automatically assume that they have to be bad at everything. And if they know that other people are thinking that way about them, they might lose motivation to try. So yeah, I'm probably on the this one as well. But again, there's not really a right answer. Now, any last questions or comments about dyscalculia or how you think it's represented? I appreciate today. I'm going to go out there and say this was the only webinar ever done on dyscalculia and pop culture. So I appreciate any views or thoughts. Are there any follow-ups? Really good question. Yes, we deliver these webinars every single week, pretty much on Thursdays at 12, and we do them on a whole heap of subjects. So they're not all going to be on this area, but we will do them on many different subjects. And I think I even have a slide which can show you that. And is there somewhere where things are made simpler for us? It's interesting. I do think for me, I go on different forums and see how other people have been able to solve challenging problems. Because, for instance, different school systems, different generations, different countries will teach maths in different ways. So if you struggle in the approach you're being taught, I would say look at how other countries or times do it. For example, my mum learned maths completely different to how I was taught it. Now, I might actually find her way easier. I think it's appreciating that we can't change the school system, at least not easily, but we can choose which way works for us. So yes, I had to attend hours and hours of lectures which were never going to be useful to me, but at home, I was able to teach myself in a way that worked better for me. I can't lie, it sucks that it takes us longer to learn than others. I'm not going to deny that, but I do think it means that it is possible. We just have to be a little bit more crafty and a little bit better at thinking, okay, I know this doesn't work for me. Rather than getting disheartened, let's try a few different approaches. And it might be that it's not the first approach that works for you or the second, but it could be the fourth, the fifth, or the sixth. So always be open-minded and always know that there's more than one way to skin a cat. That's a horrible phrase, by the way, but I don't know why we seem to use that. Okay, answered that one. Hopefully, are there any follow-up? Yes. The next webinar we're doing next week, and I highly recommend you attend this. This is a really, this is a good one. Not that today wasn't, but this is a really good one, is the terminology of neurodiversity. So what is the difference between neurodiverse, neurodivergent, neurotypical, neurominority? What's the difference between Asperger's, ASD? Can we learn about dyscalculia? We're going to be doing a real basic 101 on all the terminology which has come about in the last 10 years around neurodiversity. Really interesting. Check out our website or go on Eventbrite and search for exceptional individuals. They are always free for people who are neurodiverse. And if you aren't neurodiverse, we ask for a small contribution, but that's just to keep us afloat. But yeah, do check it out. And if you have any questions for myself or our lovely team, you know the drill. Just go to exceptionalindividuals.com or send us an email. My name's been Nat, so you can always email me at nat@accept.co.uk or exceptionalindividuals.com. Nice. Thanks so much, y'all. Been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your Thursday.